Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Let's have a look at a final round game from the 16th U.S. Championship. This is really a historic game. This event took place towards the tail end of 1963 and even spilled into the new year. On the white end, we have international master Dr. Anthony Saidy, and he's playing against Bobby Fischer. It's the result of this final round game that set an unbreakable record. Let's have a look. English opening, symmetrical English. And with this game, I'm going to pay special attention to one phase, the endgame. The opening and middle game, just some light points. We kind of fast forward through those phases. Many exchanges early on in this one brings us quickly to the endgame phase. All right, from here d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and on this move 5, e6. One of those proceed with caution type moves. d6 is now a hole, and white is quick to eye it up with knight d to b5. Both knight and queen have an eye on d6. Bishop b4. In reply to this move, white plays a3. However, do know that if this guy jumps into d6, black should not take the knight. If you're capturing the knight, this queen is very good on d6, and even if challenged, she could be reinforced. Queen on d6, a bishop on d6 would be fantastic for white. So black is, in other words, prepared to go uncastled if knight d6. Black's prepared to play king e7. This isn't the most testing continuation from here, but if knight takes this bishop, black is for choice. Has great development, no way to get at this uncastled king. Black will soon press with d5. My point, don't be so quick as black to part ways with your good bishop for a knight. Now, just as I say this, after a3, the move played in the game, we do have the good bishop being exchanged for a knight. However, this pulls this invasive knight away from this weakest square d6. And now black is able to play d5. So this early positional assault, you might say, on the d6 square has been neutralized. Okay, and black is even ready to give this knight a shove. Easily parried. White continues with e3. Castles. C takes d. E takes d. Black takes on an isolated pawn, opens up a lane for the bishop, and there's an half-open file now for a rook. Light square bishops are out. White focuses on controlling the square right in front of the isolated pawn, usually a good plan. Queen b6, also with an eye on controlling that square. White castles, knight's given a kick to d4, knight takes knight, queen takes knight, and here we go. A ram structure on board, officially in endgame. No queens, couple minor pieces each, couple rooks still on board. Black with this last move looking to get to the dream rank. Okay, trying to get to c2, denied. Black tries to get in there though, rook or bishop to c2. And the reply to this is bishop to e3. Now, the suggestion by the engine is to duck the light square bishop exchange, to play bishop f3. We would have some kind of back and forth like this. In general, it's probably a good idea for white to duck the light square bishop exchange, playing with the bishop pair, try to preserve the bishops. In this specific environment, another reason for this is you're not allowing the black rook to get to the second rank so easily. Okay, in this game, bishop e3, bishop to e3 is played, knowing that white knows by playing bishop to e3, he will be able to deal with a black rook on the second rank. So there's some several moves deep white has calculated with bishop to e3. Let's see what that calculation is exactly. After bishop takes bishop, rook f takes. That's the correct rook to take with. It is the endgame. The king now has access to f1. He's ready to quickly approach. First things first, though, black gets to the second rank, and white must challenge that rook, and does with rook d2. Black doubles, rook takes rook, rook takes rook. How is white supposed to defend the pawn? Indirectly, rook c1. This is what white had calculated when he played move 18, bishop e3. He knew he could indirectly defend b2. If black takes, white's going to have checkmate in 2. So the rooks come off, and here we are already after 23 moves. For sure, an endgame on board, knight versus bishop. Who is better? Black is better. Why is this? Well, before I go any further, I'm going to throw this to you and ask, how would you approach this endgame, knight versus bishop? What would be your next move, or 2 or 3? What's your plan here as black? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video, see what you would come up with. Okay, Fischer's plan, he says to himself, first things first, let me get my knight to a magic square. Where's the magic square? e6. How do I know it's a magic square? How do I also know that black is for choice here, when in general the bishop is supposed to be better than the knight? I'll touch on that shortly. He's focused on maneuvering the knight. Now, you may think, endgame, we bring our king towards the center. Yes, that's a good approach as well. But his focus is on getting to an optimal square for the knight. And that is the optimal square. Why? Well, it coordinates really well with this guy on d5. A knight on a light square, a pawn on a light square, they control both color complexes. Look at how they're working together. The pawn has light, and the knight, positioned on a light square, controls the dark. Covered, 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 covered. The king could never move here. How does the white king get to black's side of the board? Maybe trying to sneak over here to this square? No problem. b6 could always be played. All of these squares are under black's control, and these two key pieces, the knight on e6 and pawn on d5, they are stable. They cannot be influenced. And black could even think about going one step further, positioning another pawn on f5, taking away another square on g4. How does the white king ever cross into black's side of the board? If he can't get to black's side of the board, he's not going to pose any serious threat to black. That's how I know this is a position that, black is for choice. Black's the one playing for 2 results, a win or a draw, because of this optimal square for the knight being so effective. Okay. The reply here is king to d3, and after this move 26, I have a very nice photo to share with you. I believe this photo right here was snapped right or shortly after king d3 was played. Fischer on the left versus Saidy here. I believe Fischer is on move, from what I could gather from the photo. Yeah, interesting to kind of take all of this in here, seeing the lamp right next to the players. Fischer's in thought, I believe, right about now here, trying to figure out what his plan is now that he has his knight on e6. How to activate the king is probably running through his mind. What is the plan here? What gives me the best chance of success? How to possibly convert this? Okay, let's see what his try is. He goes with h5. Now, in general, good idea, again, to keep pawns, playing on the black side here, put pawns on dark squares. You're advancing 2 with this guy. He's opening up a square for the king. Now, just a little bit ago, I was touching on the f5 advance, but this f5 square might be a square the black king wants to make use of, where it's more central. So he's opening up a door for the king. He's going 2 squares with the h pawn. And now he has king h7. So let's see the attempt here. We eventually get to a point where black's not quite sure exactly how to approach. We have a little bit of a back and forth. Let's see how the pawns are set up. Really, should also mention this, when this knight is here, this pawn is here, the board is kind of cut in half. We're really only focused in this endgame on one side of the board. We're focused on the king side. This is where there is, where it can vary. We're not quite sure how the pawns will be positioned for either side. There's some variety left with the pawn advances for each side. The queen side of the board, not so much. It kind of comes to a dead end. So how is the king side play going to shape up? Okay, he ends up backing off with the king. King's coming back. In the end, he ends up coming up with the f-pawn advancing right now, and he's ready to go and position this guy right here on f4. So this does, I believe, provide black with the best possible winning chances. For, several of these moves, white was just holding his ground, watching over this one weak point. Let's see the progress here. Black's looking to reposition this knight next to f5. This does place a restriction on at least one of these 2 pieces. Keeps an eye on d4. And now the only attempt here, really, is to play on the king side here with the break. g4 hits. H takes g, hg, fg, and now the knight is 1 move out from immediately getting this pawn back, knight h6. So up until this point, it has been an even game. But with this play on the king side, it does now force an error, a fatal error here for white. In the game, bishop e1 is played, and it's now a win for black. And it's held like that for the rest of the game. Now, there is a draw here. I want to touch on what the drawing method would be for white in this position. It's a narrow path. There is an only move here for white. And that only move is king to e2. Let's see how white could draw this position. Instead of the move in the game, bishop e1, it's king e2, knight takes pawn, and the bishop goes to g1, a very important move, another only move for white. This bishop is on his back foot, but doing a good enough job of restricting the knight's forward moves, all forward moves. If king f5, king f3. And where do you go from here as black? Piece by piece comparison, bishop knocks out the knight, bishop controls the knight, white king controls the black king. We certainly do not want to allow the black king to get to e4. I was pointing out a magic square for the knight earlier on, maneuvering to e6. Well, if this guy could establish himself on e4, that would be golden. Next up, all you would have to do is maneuver the knight to attack that pawn, and you're going to be winning that pawn if this guy is here. But now, what would you play here as black to make progress? Again, this is the drawing method white had available to him. There really isn't a great attempt here. We could look at the different options. Suppose king g5, or let's say b6 or a6. I'll just pick one of them. If b6 is played, this is how white could continue. g3. And these guys get exchanged. And this square is not available to black because the king has a responsibility to defend the knight. King e4, king takes knight. So exchanging the kingside pawns like this would be helpful for white because there would then be one less square taken away from the white king. He'd be able to pivot on these two squares, and the king is never able to enter on e4, and the knight, by definition, could never control a light and dark square at the same time, so the white king would always have access to one of these two. Any other attempt in this position here is black. There is one other one to look at. This move, and this move can all be met with g3. However, if knight f6 in this position, g3 would be losing. g3, chop, chop, the king gets here. This knight could follow a similar path as he did earlier, getting to e6, and this pawn will be won. However, white could still draw this, not with g3, but with bishop to h2, immediately putting pressure on this pawn. That's the drawing method. And how do you defend the pawn? Knight h5 could now be met with a5, and you see what just happened? Everything is basically frozen now on black's side. What do? Can't move any of your pawns. Okay, you shouldn't move this pawn. You can't move the knight. You drop the pawn. You're down to moving your king, and you can't go wherever you want with the king. You have to go here to stay trained on this point, but now you're not one square away from e4. Now white will be able to play g3, and we would get this liquidated position, for instance, and this would be a drawn king and pawn endgame. We're observing here a key difference between having the bishop on g1 and e1. Okay, in this game, bishop e1 is played. Knight takes g4, and these next handful of moves by white are bishop moves. He goes bishop to d2. If the king tries to go to e2 in this position, just one move later, it's not the same. King e2, king f5, king f3 stops king e4, but because the bishop is on e1 and not g1, the knight has access to h2, check. And the king is kicked away from defending e4. The king gets to the golden square, the magic square, and this guy will soon be won. Black goes on to win. Big difference here. Bishop on e1 versus g1. It's really important to have this check covered by the bishop. Okay. How does the game continue? Bishop d2. Black enters. Bishop e1. Maneuvering the knight. Knight e4. Bishop back. King improves. And now king to e2, knight g3 check. This knight can't be captured, should not be captured. Bishop takes knight would be met with king takes bishop, and this would be a one king and pawn ending. King f1, we push, and this guy is way out of position. This pawn will soon be hunted. So you can't go straight into a king and pawn ending, and you must make a decision then with the king. In the game, king d3 is played. So your choices here are to stay close to the g-pawn, try and defend the g-pawn or the d-pawn. In the game, after king d3, black in just a few moves ends up going after the g-pawn and wins the g-pawn. So what's the other try? If the king goes here, what's the winning plan? This is very instructive. King f2 could be met with knight f5. Hitting this pawn, only one way to defend it, and now knight to e3. What do you do about knight d1 check? You don't really have much choice here. If you move the bishop, you're going to end up losing this pawn to a fork. And if you move the pawn, you're going to lose the bishop to the fork. What other options are there here for white? If you just sit, let's say for instance, make a pawn move, we would land this check. You could actually exchange into this ending. And this is considered a win here for Team Black. It may be a little bit scary, for sure, this idea of white playing c4, but that would be the only try here. If you're not trying c4 right here, making a king move, this king is already close, and there's no fear of the c4 advance. But let's have a look at this variation right here, where we trade into a king and pawn specific ending, and this idea of c4. Black is winning after this sequence. The capture, let's say push, push. Black's ready to promote with check, so the king definitely has to stop that. King takes pawn. If this guy keeps running, check this position now. Each of these passed pawns are 2 steps away from queening. One way or the other, this guy is either going to promote and give check, or this guy is going to be able to promote and give check. Black is simply faster at this stage. So I don't know, if you go here, you're going to promote with check. If you go here, we're going to have this promotion with check, and then we're going to be given check along the back rank. Black wins the race. So the king and pawn endings are all working out here for Team Black. This is a great maneuver here by the knight. In the event, in this position right here, in the event of king f2, we go knight f5, knight e3, and that's a beautiful pivot on d1. In this game, it is king d3, and the g2 pawn is simply scooped up in a few moves. Black made progress here on the king side, gave himself winning chances. It has been now for a few moves. Ever since bishop to e1, it has been a win for Black. Knight f5, bishop f2, no time to come over at this stage. The king now has a responsibility, defend d4. Bishop f2, knight h4, trading. Again, bishop for knight is going to be a win. We've already been in this situation before, so the pawn is simply won. a5 is tried, knight takes pawn, the black king enters, and how do you stop f2? In general, you should be positioning your bishop on a diagonal where it has the most mobility. So he tries bishop to g3, has 3 options along this diagonal, whereas this one only gives the bishop 4 options versus this diagonal here with 3. Bishop g3 in this game, and only one final move. Knight e3, and white resigns. These two are under control by the king, and next up the knight's going to go here and control these 2 squares. The bishop will not be able to sacrifice itself for the pawn. This guy will be queening. So, with this win, this put Fischer at a perfect 11 out of 11. 11 games, 11 wins. Here's a look at the standings from this event. How do you set an unbreakable record? There's only one way you could do that, and that is to go perfect. That's exactly what he did in this event, and it has yet to happen again. And there's even a prize nowadays with the U.S. Championship. Should anyone match this record, congratulations. You've earned the Fischer Prize. You've increased your bank account by $64,000. Okay, that's the incentive for going perfect at this event. Anyhow, feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.